The research that we're going to be talking about is a very small part of a much larger, kind of still developing project that focuses on the ways that Boethian music theory in particular is employed as a literary aesthetic and rhetorical device in medieval and early modern texts, especially English, French, and Italian works. So obviously we're focusing more on the Italian side of things today. Growing out of the close relationship between the arts of rhetoric and music, the late medieval and early modern period exhibit a persistent interest in an interdisciplinary perspective on music theory and performance, branching out from music as music to incorporate visual arts and literature, among other fields including philosophy, science, and mathematics. This inter-arts and even to our view, sort of inter-science perspective can be seen in part in the development of opera as a musico-literary form, and in the proliferation of literary texts engaging music theory, particularly that of the late classical author Boethius. Best known for his allegorical dialogue De Consolatione Philosophiae, Boethius also set forth an influential theory of music in his unfinished 6th century treatise, De Institutione Musica. Our focus today is, of course, on how several of his general music theories were subsequently incorporated by Dante in La Commedia and then Monteverdi in his first opera, L'Orfeo. And we're going to sort of sidestep the debate about whether Monteverdi's L'Orfeo is just his first opera or the first opera. There's some, Giacomo Peri was doing some great things too. And that is kind of a point of contention among musicologists, so we'll just sort of leave it at that in a moment. In La Commedia, Dante incorporates what I term literary aesthetic of musica, by which I mean a literary use of music raised to the level of an aesthetic principle, fundamentally at work in the text, shaping its structure and interpretation, even in the absence of notated or sounded music. So this is music used as a structural principle outside of sound. Music is music, so texts that don't ostensibly have anything to do with music. So this is accomplished through frequent depictions of musical performance from the perspective of both the musician and the audience, and representations of Boethian music theory that mediate the distinctions for Dante between an exilic antagonistic experience on the one hand, and Dante's vision of the circumscribing unity of the divine on the other hand, in the overall musical teleology of La Commedia. This musico-literary aesthetic persists in later early modern works, including Monteverdi's opera, L'Orfeo, which echoes aesthetic and rhetorical elements of both La Commedia and Boethian music theory. So we kind of have to start with Boethius. And for some of you, this might be a review, and for others of you, it may be all new, so we'll spend a little bit of time finding our way. Boethius's De Musica addresses a wide range of musical philosophy and theory, including perspective on music's affective properties, as well as rules for composition and performance. His treatise on music was arguably the single most important ancient source for medieval music theory and continued to exert a significant influence throughout the early modern period. From as early as the 9th century, Boethius was considered the authority most revered for music theoretic matters, and De Musica remained the foundation of musical studies throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. In fact, it was the primary music textbook in medieval and early modern universities across Europe, and was used as a text at Oxford until the 18th century. So it had kind of a long, authoritative life, I guess. Although his theories were sometimes challenged by actual medieval and early modern musical practice, whether theoretical, compositional, or performative, especially the principles and practices of polyphony, his views on music philosophy and theory were pervasive and hugely influential for some 1,000 or more years after his death, influencing the attitudes and compositional practices, both literary and musical, of many of his artistic descendants. Boethius is both a product of his Greco-Roman heritage and a selective assessor of it. Few of the theories in De Musica are unique to him. However, this derivative nature leads to the question of how he applied and expanded upon the ideas he inherited, and how later composers of music and literature engage his work. Boethius's conception of musica is polysemous and much more capacious than the current usage of the modern term music would suggest. Beyond simply sounded harmonies, as Schuler notes, for Boethius, quote, music is a matter of pure scientific speculation. His aesthetics is mathematical and structural, end quote, and its application of music is often ultimately philosophical. Indeed, grounded in the principle of harmony as a factor of mathematic proportion, Boethius is primarily concerned with philosophical speculations as to the nature of music, its effects, and its relation to man and the world in which he lives. It is this expansive conception of music that informs the medieval and early modern afterlife of Boethian music theory, and the literary aesthetic of musica employed in the works by Dante and Monteverdi that we'll look at in a few minutes. I'm gonna get the right direction. There we go. So, the 5 tenets of Boethian theory most pertinent to my talk today are all discussed in De Musica Book 1, and are perhaps more generously considered music philosophy or scientia. They relate to individual, civic, and aesthetic concerns over the form, function, and power of music beyond the strictly performative or compositional practices of voice and instrument. We'll first discuss each of these principles in terms of Boethian theory, and then turn to 2 examples, one from Dante and Monteverdi, respectively, as a sort of case study to explore how they apply these principles more broadly in their literary and musical works. Goodness, I know some of you are writing, but they'll come back. The first of these tenets is the concept of the music of the spheres, probably a concept that several of us know quite a bit about or have heard of before. So this is the idea of musica mundana, humana, and instrumentalis. Itself certainly not strictly a Boethian idea. Boethius codifies the classical concept of the music of the spheres, identifying within this paradigm 3 interrelated categories of music. The first is cosmic, whereas the second is human. The third is that which rests in certain instruments. Though he never uses the term music of the spheres, his categorization of music into cosmic, human, meaning both of the voice and of the soul, and instrumental music forms the core of what later theorists refer to as musica speculativa, a term that itself privileges the role of speculative thought, of music as rational, natural, and philosophical theory, as well as practical harmony. Boethius' idea of the music of the spheres is a synthesis of Platonic, Aristotelian, and Pythagorean principles about the tripartite division of music and its role both in cosmic organization, mathematically and harmonically, and as an aural intermediary between the things of the gods and the things of humanity. The second tenet is the idea of the dual nature of music, capable of either elevating or degrading, often figured in sweet or harsh sonorities. Capable of inspiring the passions to sublimity or depravity, music's affective potential on human behavior is actually often a cause for concern. Analysis of the moral function of music has a very long critical history within secular and religious circles. Referring to Plato, Boethius promotes the positive force of music while warning away from the negative potential of its influence. As he says, "For nothing is more characteristic of human nature than to be soothed by pleasant modes or disturbed by their opposites." Plato states that there is no greater ruin of morals in a republic than the gradual perversion of chaste and temperate music. Apparently we can owe all badness to that ugly beginning. For the minds of those, badness is an excellent word, sorry. For the minds of those listening, at first acquiesce, then they gradually submit, preserving no trace of honesty or justice. Music is apparently pretty intense. As Boethius relates it, Plato's primary concern is that given music's capacity to affect human behavior, there is a real danger that when misused or misunderstood, music can lead to negative consequences for both the individual and for society as a whole. Third, the idea of music as metaphysical pharmakon, a formulation particularly appropriate to Dante's Purgatorio. Boethius asserts the capacity of music to influence the human body, mind, soul, and behavior, figuring music as a sort of oral pharmakon. He says, "It is common knowledge that song has many times calmed rages, and that it has often worked great wonders on the affections of bodies or minds. Who does not know that Pythagoras, by performing a spondy, restored a drunk adolescent of Taormina, incited by the sound of the Phrygian mode, to a calmer and more composed state?" Of course, the authenticity of Pythagoras' account of his of this account of Pythagoras' remedy for the drunken adolescent may rightly be suspect, but in Boethius' account and kind of take on it, his subsequent list of individuals and groups variously soothed, incited, or healed by the properties of sound and music. Boethius then emphasizes the role of music as a pharmacon, able to restore or even establish a rightful cosmic, individual, or social order, specifically through sounded ratio and proportion. Fourth, the imperative to hear and interpret music properly. In order for musica to function as either pharmacon or moral guide, it must be heard. Although the highest level of musica speculativa, musica mundana, is not audible to human ears, Boethius emphasizes the critical importance of the sounds of music and the process of hearing as a means to gaining proper understanding. He says, indeed, no path to the mind is as open for instruction as the sense of hearing. Thus, when rhythms and modes reach an intellect through the ears, your ears are close to your brain, so it's easier to get in there, they doubtless affect and reshape that mind according to their particular character. Boethius distinguishes music and hearing from the other quadrivial arts and the remaining four senses as the best suited means of searching for truth, aligning the process of properly hearing the right music with concepts of rational order and proper understanding on both an individual and, again, civic level. And finally, the role and nature of the musicus or musician. Boethius is one of the first theorists to define a musician as anything other than a mere performer. Book 1 of De Musica concludes with a lengthy discussion of the types of musicians and the role of the true musicus. He says, but a true musician is one who has gained knowledge of making music by weighing with the reason, not through the servitude of work, but through the sovereignty of speculation. There are three classes of those who are engaged in the musical art. The first consists of those who perform on instruments, the second of those who compose songs, and the third of those who judge instrumental performance and song. Among the three postulated types of musicians, the only true musicus, as far as Boethius is concerned, is the third type, who with reason and an understanding of theory as well as practice of the artem musicam, the art of music, can judge instrumental works and songs. It's a critic. Explaining these categories further, after dismissing the instrumentalists as limited in their musicality, Boethius then clarifies the final two levels of musicians. I know it's a lot to read. In his taxonomy. The second class of those practicing music is that of the poets, a class led to song not so much by thought and reason as by a certain natural instinct. The third class is that which acquires an ability for judging, so that it can carefully weigh rhythms and melodies and the composition as a whole. This class, since it is totally grounded in reason and thought, will rightly be esteemed as musical. Privileging theoretical training, in addition to practical, especially instrumental experience, the Boethian musicus can both compose and theorize. Understanding through reason the philosophies and mathematics behind the sound of music, the musicus can best appreciate music and thus interpret and judge it for others. Additionally, Boethius takes this opportunity to align rhetorica and musica, just as he does in his Consolatione, distinguishing the second type of musician as specifically a poet, and stating that the musicus can uniquely bring together musica and rhetorica by being able to understand the songs of the poets. So with these basic Boethian principles in mind, we can now turn our attention to Dante's La Commedia and its contentious spaces of exile, death, and social and cosmic upheaval. Within his poem, Dante displaces himself, along with Florentine, Italian, Catholic, and Roman history, in an effort to enact a fiction of restoration beyond the limits of worldly history, politics, religion, and geography. While this observation has been studied from a number of critical perspectives, the role of music in the process of mediating metaphysical identity, exile, and dislocation bears further discussion. From Inferno to Paradiso, music pervades La Commedia, presenting, as Francesco Ciabattoni put it, quote, a clear musical design in the soundscape of the three otherworldly realms, end quote. Whether in the antithetically styled cacophony of Inferno, a sort of infernal anti-music, or the traditional monophony of Purgatorio, or in the increasingly complex and often disembodied polyphony of Paradiso, Dante grounds the music of his poem in the Boethian music of the spheres, moving through musica instrumentalis, humana, and mundana in their respective canticles, and employing an aesthetic of musica enacted through contemporary performance practices. Evoking Boethian music theory as Dante reimagines it in Trecento Florence, music serves as a consolation in exile, a marker of displacement and identity, a structure of cosmic unity, and a method of reconciliation, return, and even resolution. That music should take on this role of mediation for Dante in his literary work is hardly a surprise given his background. From his early education with the famous composer Landini to his later theories of literary composition and authorship, particularly as expressed in De Vulgari Eloquentia, where he defines poetry as a fiction composed of rhetoric and music. In these and other examples in his work and writings, Dante frequently privileges the aesthetic and poetic impact of combining rhetoric and music in his literary art. By way of example, throughout La Commedia, Dante presents episodes of musical performance that are often overt depictions of the Boethian music of the spheres, and especially in Purgatorio of musica humana. That is to say, reconciliation and union come through the active participation of the souls and Dante as they listen to, properly interpret, and perform music. This participation corresponds with the consolation of music that Boethius himself narrates in the allegorical role he assigns to musica as a character alongside rhetorica in De Consolatione. He says, with this one, music, sing in measure, now with levity, now with gravity. So this is Boethius from De Consolatione. Here, Boethius' prisoner is instructed to sing along with the character of musica in order to find consolation. A requirement to participate in music intimately in order to glean the greatest effect from the consolatory potential inherent in it. Similarly, as Dante and the souls in Purgatorio and then Paradiso enact their salvation via their active participation in song, they too sing with both gravity and levity, figured quite literally in the narrative. Purgatorio is distinguished by gravity, the weightiness of sin literally pulling the souls to the ground, whereas Paradiso is marked by levity or lightness, as souls now unburdened by sin are able to ascend through the heavenly spheres. Dante focuses on the affective potential of music's influence on the soul, incorporating consolation and transcendence. In addition to depicting the music of the spheres, music in Purgatorio balances the dual nature of music, the importance of hearing rightly, the role of the musician, and the function of music as pharmacon. On the terraces of Mount Purgatory, the soul's music functions in part as a participatory atoning act. The souls literally sing the purgation of their own sins, as their music frequently supports and reinforces the functions of their respective contrapasso punishments. This brings us to our first brief case study. One such example in Purgatorio occurs in Canto 23 and involves the gluttonous on the 6th terrace of the mountain. As he journeys up the mountain with Virgil, Dante the pilgrim hears the souls singing words from Psalm 50. And he says, when with weeping we heard voices sing, Labia mea Domine, in tones that brought at once delight and grief. In support of their punishment, as the once gluttonous are now wasted to the point of starvation, their atoning song reinforces this quite literal opposition, focusing on their lips, Labia mea Domine, my lips, Lord, as a metonymic reminder of their sins. This episode simultaneously emphasized the importance of the reception of music in addition to its performance. Despite being a somewhat unintended audience, Dante is just journeying on up the mountain with Virgil, the music has an immediate effect on him, and he is caught up by the, quote, delight and grief of the song. Just as the souls go weeping and singing, blending lamentation and praise, Dante's reaction to their musical performance combines positive and negative emotion, which he is at first unable to make sense of. As Dante is a listener rather than a participating musician, The effective force that the song has on him emphasizes the Boethian principle of music's ability to impact both the performer and the listener, illustrating the importance of the reception of music and of hearing rightly. The importance of interpretation is also made evident as Dante, uncertain of how to interpret what he has heard, turns to Virgil for guidance. He says, "O sweet father, what is that I hear?" I asked. And he said, "Shades, perhaps, who go their way, loosening the knot of what they owe." In order to help Dante rightly understand the music and his emotional response to the soul's song, Virgil immediately interprets what they have heard using the metaphor of the bonds of debt, the burden of that which is owed and must be paid back, to relate the meaning of the traditional music to these particular souls and their experience. In this context, the metaphor of the knot illustrates the process of freeing oneself from the bonds of sin. While the souls are no longer able to sin, of course, they are still bound down by the weight and effects of their previous sins. As they untie the knot of their debt, the souls are released from both their sins themselves and the debt they owe as a result. Interestingly, Virgil does not say that the souls repay their debt. Rather, they are released from it in keeping with Dante's conception of divine atonement and the purpose of purgation, to align one's will with the divine and purge oneself of the desire for sin, rather than to make actual recompense for it. Virgil thus emphasizes the function of the punishment and their song, as the souls participate in their own atonement both physically and musically, singing and suffering as the means of loosening the knot of what they owe. Narratively, the music of the gluttonous functions as a fiction of musica humana, to structure the progress of souls and the process of their purgation and mediation, immediately mediating their earthly experience with the heavenly experience they are attempting to attain. Though Dante doesn't follow Boethius by including la musica as a personage in his Commedia, the function of musica's oversight is apparent in the disembodied yet permeating influence of music throughout the poem. The aesthetic of musica employed in Dante's La Commedia illustrates a musical-literary consolation in the Boethian tradition. Figuring Dante the Pilgrim as a Florentine exile, he uses literary fictions of the music of the spheres, especially musica humana and mundana, with particular attention to the concerns over the dual nature of music and the relationship, both affective and analytical or interpretive, between musical performance and reception, in order to enable a new type of reunion after exile. Political exile is thus superseded by the divine order of the Dantean cosmos, and circumscribed within the harmonic unity of God, who for Dante is the organizer of music itself. Which kind of makes sense why there isn't a La Musica, because the source of all of that, instead of being, for Boethian La Musica, for Dante, is God. Shifts. From Boethian music to Dante's reinterpretation of Boethian music, let's now turn to our final example, one of several Dantean and Boethian depictions in Monteverdi's first opera, L'Orfeo, as a sort of preliminary study. And we already discussed this may not be the first opera, but we can agree that it's Monteverdi's first opera, so we'll go with that. Although many of the principles of Boethian music theory were well integrated into the cultural musical milieu of 1607, when L'Orfeo was first performed for Gonzagan Court Festival in Mantua, and could have indirectly informed Monteverdi's composition, we know from his own writings, several personal letters, and the introduction to his 8th book of madrigals, that he read Boethius's De Musica and considered Boethian philosophy and theory directly as he framed his own work as a musician. So he's not taking Boethius, from the atmosphere around him, right, directly. Monteverdi's connection to Dante is also well accounted for. Most scholars who look to Dantean influences in L'Orfeo focus on the thematic and structural connections between Dante's depiction of hell and Monteverdi's underworld in the central third act of his 5-act opera. And rightly so. Act 3 on its own includes a number of examples of intertextual and ultimately inter-arts references to Dante's Commedia. From the direct quotation of the inscription over the gates of hell, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," the function of the character La Speranza as a sort of Virgilian guide for Orfeo, to the poetic meter Alessandro Striggio, who worked with Monteverdi to write the libretto, employs in Orfeo's central aria in that act. an 11-syllable poetic line as in Dante's Commedia. Act 3 is, in itself, a study of Dante's poetic project put to the service of the new musical-literary form, opera. However, the moment I'd like to discuss today comes before the proper beginning of the opera, in the prologue, when Lady Musica herself introduces the opera, framing the audience's experience of the subsequent action. It's long. You have time to read it. It's the last slide, so you can just keep staring at it for a moment. Structurally, the prologue is a strophic song, where each of the 5 stanzas of La Musica's speech is sung to basically the same melody with some variations in adornment and rhythm. And each is followed by the same ritornello, when it's put into musical form, like a repeating chorus, that quickly becomes associated with the figure of La Musica. Though La Musica herself does not appear again in the opera, her ritornello, that musical motif, does at several points and serves as a sort of melodic reminder of the role and function of La Musica. Some critics have even referred to this as anticipating Wagnerian leitmotif. Thus, these kind of musical cameos, so to speak, evoke the ever-presence of the music of the spheres, disembodied and yet remembered, still overseeing the rest of the musical action of the opera. Boethius himself certainly personifies La Musica in his own literary work, De Consolazione, and although Dante does not, music's theoretic, rhetorical, aesthetic, and philosophical function is apparent in both these authors' respective works. And this notion of La Musica as potentially both embodied and disembodied music informs Monteverdi's appropriation and innovation with the character. Monteverdi presents La Musica as a personification of the music of the spheres. Her prologue is a direct address to the first audience, the noble bloodline of rulers of the Gonzagan court, and she establishes her identity and effective role as she directs the audience in a right interpretation of the forthcoming opera. This is a sort of operatic ekessus, right, in the medieval tradition. From the start, we know where she comes from, her messus, and who she is. Io la musica son, I am music. Moving on throughout the prologue, and I think it's interesting, I'm just going to back up, that when she introduces herself and says, Io la musica son, she doesn't say, like, my name is music, but I am la musica with the definite article, like the noun itself, completely embodied. So moving on, throughout the prologue, La Musica quickly establishes her powers, the intended effect of the upcoming opera, and the audience's responsibilities, all while echoing the 5 basic tenets of Boethian music theory we've discussed. Over the course of 5 brief stanzas, this necessarily occurs with a notably succinct musical and poetic efficiency. In stanza 2, we see La Musica as embodied pharmacon, who can metaphysically heal as she makes peaceful every troubled heart. Moving from her healing power to her dual nature, she is able to inflame the coldest minds with noble anger and with love. Stanza 3 turns to the concept of the music of the spheres and establishes music's mediative power. She can, entering in through mortal ears, which of course is Boethius' favorite aspect of music, right, lead their souls, the souls of men, to the resounding harmony of the lyre of heaven. Moving from the musica humana of the body and soul to the musica mundana of heaven. Further, this stanza also foreshadows Orfeo's music, bringing to mind Orfeo's lyre, not yet seen in the opera, but which the audience, who already knows the story, anticipates. This suggestion of Orfeo's musical instrument prefigures one more lyre among the golden lyre of La Musica and the lyre of heaven. The poetic and musical foreshadowing, which is also a sort of remembering, because remember the audience knows what to anticipate in the story, provides the foundation for La Musica's expectation that the audience read these 3 lyres as fundamentally connected and all leading toward the heavens. With this and stanza 4's sort of synopsis of the opera to come, La Musica frames the audience's experience of the opera, establishing their responsibility to attend to both the music and poetry, and then interpret it all correctly. In addition to delineating these other aspects of Boethian music theory at work in La Musica's characterization and her presentation of the upcoming opera, stanzas 2 through 5 also repeatedly emphasize the role of the musician. First La Musica, and then Orfeo. La Musica is both an instrumentalist and a vocalist, a divine organizer of cosmic harmonic principles. Her music transcends to the heavens and also has the effective metaphysical and physical power, over the souls and bodies of humanity and even over the natural world. As she expounds in stanza 5, while I vary my songs, now happy, now sad, no small bird shall move among these bushes, nor on these banks a sounding wave be heard, and every breeze shall stay its wanderings. Orfeo's music likewise has power, albeit more limited power, sanctioned by the overarching presence of La Musica and the idea of musica mundana. Stanza 4 relates that Orfeo's song tamed wild beasts and made Hades answer his prayers. From the start, we know, or are reminded, that Orfeo's music similarly impacts the natural world, where the wild beasts are drawn to him, and the realms of the divine, where his prayers seem to be answered in the infernal underworld. But we also know it doesn't really work out the way he thinks it's going to work out. He loses Eurydice at the end. So the power of his music ultimately fails because it's not quite as expansive, therefore quite as powerful and divine as La Musica herself. Just kind of a couple steps down the ladder. It is with this introduction about and by La Musica, replete with demands placed upon the audience for their attention and even limitations on how they should engage with and interpret the performance to come, that Monteverdi prefaces his first opera. Through his studious application of a literary aesthetic of music within his Musico-Literary project, Monteverdi manages to engage an authoritative history of both musica and rhetorica, effectively structuring and sanctioning this new form through both fields. Though merely sketched out here, in conclusion, Dante and Monteverdi demonstrate a shared interest in classical Boethian music theory as it is appropriated and reimagined in the medieval and early modern periods. Though by no means do I intend to suggest that music theory and aesthetics stagnate for some 1,000 years after Boethius. Indeed, by the time Monteverdi engages Boethius, it isn't quite on Boethius's original terms, nor is it even quite in Dante's own appropriation of Boethius in those same terms. It is, as Boethius and Dante's own theories and aesthetic applications were, an appropriation and reinterpretation, with the particular ways in which they blend music and literature in their works. Dante and Monteverdi similarly engage Boethian music theory to create a series of explicit aesthetic moments that use the images and ideas of music, rhetoric, and poetry to shape musical literary narratives of rhetorical interplay and unifying harmonic structure.